Hey Internet, for this video I'm going to transfer the internals of a computer into another case. The case on the right houses some older components. In my opinion, this case looks awesome and needs to be rebuilt with modern parts. So I'm going to transfer its internals to the case on the left. The left case was donated to me by a friend. It previously had an even older build on it. Notice it has a floppy disk drive. It probably had an AMD Athlon or Pentium 4 prior to being stripped. Let's get started. Opening the case. This is the inside of the case I'm going to transfer the parts to. You can tell it's pretty old. There's an IDE ribbon cable left over from the previous build. These are the parts that I want to transfer to the other case. I'm going to save this case for a future build using modern parts. Alright, time to get these parts out of this case and onto the other one. The case on the right is micro ATX, hence it being a little smaller. Case on the left is a standard ATX case from 2005, so it's a good bit smaller than today's ATX cases. Despite the age, it's still good and can house these internals. The only thing I'm probably not going to use is the floppy drive. Also, before I dive right in, I need to make sure to put all the screws removed in their own pile, so they don't get mixed up when putting everything back together. I'll remove the video card first. They're often secured onto the case by a screw or two. The card won't come off until you release the PCIe locking mechanism. Remove the video card power connector. Sometimes it's really in there hard like it is here. Once the video card is out, remove all the connections to the motherboard. Before doing that, take several pictures of the motherboard with all the connections in. Especially take pictures of the power and reset switches. This is so when putting it back together in another case, you know what goes where. Okay, I got all the pictures needed to put it back the way it is. Time to remove all the connections. Front audio out. SATA cables to the hard drive and DVD drives out. Motherboard power out. For some boards, there's an additional 8-pin power connector. This board doesn't have that. With most of the connections out, save for the power and reset switches, the motherboard screws can now be removed. Once the screws are out, remove the motherboard from the case. Notice I left the power and reset connections intact. That's because I could not get a good angle at a picture for these. The connections for the power, reset, and LED switches are usually connected individually and sometimes not marked on the motherboard, so it's important to get a good picture of where they're connected before removing them. The other connection is for the front USB. Now that I have the pictures for these connections, they can be removed. Luckily this board has markings telling what goes where, so I didn't really need the pictures. However, I worked with boards before that didn't, and the markings were only in a manual. It's just good practice to take pictures, especially if you're regularly working with computer hardware and are connecting and disconnecting things often. Alright, the motherboard is completely out. Place it in a safe, static-free location where it doesn't get damaged. Unscrewing the power supply. Removing the power supply. Unscrewing the drive mounts. I think newer tech people are wondering why even bother with DVD drives when everything can either be downloaded online or loaded onto a USB flash drive. And my answer to that is I'm old school. I built my first computer in 2000, and just for that reason, I could never bring myself to put together a PC without a disk drive of sorts. There's screws on both sides, so turning over the case, unscrewing the drive screws on the other side. I wonder if they ever made newer cases which only require screws on one side to mount drives. Pop off the I/O shield and place it in a safe location. Remove the drives. You may have to prop open the front panel to remove the disk drive like so. Note, some cases require a good amount of force to remove the front panel. Not this one though. Once the disk drive is removed, put the front panel back. Now that the old computer parts are removed, time to close this case and save it for a future build. So these are the parts removed: an AMD Radeon HD 6770, 60 gig mechanical hard drive, an LG DVD drive, Wintec power supply, and a gigabyte Intel motherboard, with what I assume to be an i3. All that stuff is going in here, with a minor modification of exchanging the floppy drive with front USB ports. First thing we need to do with this case is remove the floppy drive. Unscrewing it from the case. It's pretty amazing that a floppy drive was left over from this case. I haven't seen one of these in years. Not even sure if you can even install these on newer boards, but it would be neat to do so. I could install some old 80s and 90s games and run them on Windows 98 Virtual Machine or something. If it's possible, I'm going to definitely install this on a future build. I remember back in the day getting a shareware version of Heretic off a floppy disk that was included in a PC joystick. Maybe eBay's got some working floppy disk games I could try out. It's pretty cool this case had a floppy drive. These are the connections for the power, reset switches, and HDD lights. Remember the pictures taken of the connections earlier? We're going to use that to know what goes where now. This particular motherboard also shows the connection layout just under the connector, but it's still good to take a picture. Like I said earlier, some older motherboards only show the layout in the manual, not the board itself. Using the pictures taken earlier as a guide, individually place the switch contacts to the motherboard. It's good to put these in first before screwing in the motherboard. Depending on the location of these connections, it can be an annoying process to put in the contacts with the board situated inside the case. Placing the I/O shield into the case. These can be a pain to put in at times, as it sometimes refuses to go in. Also be careful when using force putting in an I/O shield. The metal in these can cut you. This case has standoffs already installed, so I can just screw the motherboard right in. Standoffs are important as they can protect from electrical shorts. When I built my first computer, I didn't use standoffs, and the computer refused to turn on. Luckily, the motherboard wasn't damaged. Not using standoffs caused the metal in the case making contact with the board to act as an electrical ground, preventing it from powering on. When I added standoffs, the motherboard was able to power on. So yeah, don't be like me and forget to use standoffs. DVD drive going in the front. Good thing there's no need to remove the front panel to place a disk drive like with the previous case. Simply slides right in. Installing the USB front panel where the floppy drive used to be. The floppy drive is going to be used in a future test build, so into my parts pile it goes. This case actually included a bottom front panel with USB and audio ports. Unfortunately, it went missing, so I had to buy this as a replacement. Let's secure the disk drive and USB panel to the case. Almost done. Just need to install the power supply and do all the connections. Screw in the disk drive and front USB to the case. I usually don't put in all the screws, but since I won't be swapping out parts anytime soon, I can put in all the screws to secure the disk drive and front USB. Have to do both sides to make sure they're secure. Apparently this motherboard lacks USB 3.0 connections, so I'll only be installing the front panel audio. I'd have to get a USB 3.0 to 2.0 converter to get the front USB connections to work with the front panel ports. It was careless of me not to check and end up buying a USB 3.0 front panel. This board only supports USB 2.0 front ports. Connecting the front audio onto the motherboard. It should say HD audio or AC97. Installing the hard drive. Have to remove one of the RAM sticks since it's blocking the way to where I need to mount the hard drive. I should have put the hard drive in first before screwing in the motherboard to the case. If I had a big heatsink installed, I would have needed to remove the motherboard just to put in the hard drive. Luckily, it was only the RAM blocking the way. Screwing in the hard drive. 60 gigs is a bit small these days. Some smartphones have more storage than this computer. Gotta put the screws on the other side. Mechanical drives don't like movement in the case after all. In my opinion, the most annoying part of putting the computer together, aside from installing the heatsink, is screwing in the drives. You only ever open the other side panel for that purpose. It's even worse if you're running cables in the back and their position gets messed up when opening the reverse side panel. Okay, now that all the drives are secured, connect the SATA cables to the motherboard. Having pictures from earlier will be handy if you want to put the cables in the same exact order as it was in the previous case. Connect the SATA cables to the drives. We're almost done. Just a few more parts to go. Install the video card to the motherboard. Be sure to put it in the same PCI Express slot as it was before. Installing the video card. Make sure the video card is firmly seated on the PCI Express slot. Once secure, screw in the video card to the case. Installing the power supply. This power supply is 450 watts. It's more than enough to provide power to this computer. I feel it still has plenty of life, since this computer isn't exactly a power hog. Screw in the power supply. Now to connect everything together. Use the pictures taken before unplugging everything as a guide to see where the power supply connections go if you don't remember. Taking pictures before removing parts basically makes even a person with little to no experience in building computers capable of swapping internals from one case to another. Connecting the rear fan power. Connecting power to the motherboard. Connecting power to the disk and hard drive. And lastly, connecting a 6-pin PCI Express power connector to the video card. Alright, everything looks good and is connected properly. It's not the most prettiest sight. I could have done a better job on the cables, but since this computer is just a throwaway guest room one, I'll just leave it like it is. Let's turn on the computer. Great, it powers on. Now let's hope there's an image on the screen. Don't mind the disco lights. For some reason I couldn't turn them off. Rolling up the camera to show the screen. Windows is starting. I didn't screw up after all. Okay, after a bit of loading, I finally got to the desktop. Looks like everything is good. Now I can move this computer to the guest room. And that's it. Give a like if you found this video helpful, and a dislike if you felt otherwise. Also, thanks for watching.